yeah, being young.
Welcome to 20-Allthings. My name is Kevin, and this is a web project dedicated to people in their 20s. So for today's episode, I have the honor and privilege of talking to a life coach. Fun fact, him and we met in person for the first time a few hours ago, and we've been, prior to that, we were talking and connecting over online. And you know what, when I talked to this guy, he was definitely a wealth of information, so I just had to get him on the show. So without further ado, please welcome Jason Cornillez.
Kevin, thank you so much for having me here, having this space for me just to speak and talk with you here today. And I just love having a conversation, so it's an honor to be here.
That's great. And I'm really happy that you're here. And so for the people who are watching or listening, can you let us know a bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Jason. I am 39 years old, definitely not in my 20s. But I am a husband of 10 years. I'm a father of 3 beautiful children. I am a son of immigrant parents from the Philippines.
Represent, there you go.
Yeah, and born and raised here in San Jose. Been working kind of traditional route, school, college, jobs, and then I've been at my current corporate job for the past 15 years. In the last 4 to 5 years, I've really kind of deepened my relationship with personal development and started reading more books, listening to podcasts, and just became a little more inspired. And by doing that, life coaching really became on my radar. And, service to other people, I just feel like the pandemic really forced my hand to create a life that I wanted, and with the kids being at home, I just wanted them to see me loving what I do, striving to be a better person, and life coaching I didn't pursue life coaching right away, but then a year ago I just kind of pulled the trigger and recently became a life coach.
Congratulations on
this
that.
past month, and I'm happy about that, and here we are.
That is so great to hear. And when I was talking to Jason, over call and also in person, the one topic that we discussed that I think was so fascinating and is so helpful for people in their 20s is the topic of empathy. And before we dive into that topic, Jason, can you let us know in its simplest sense, what is empathy?
Empathy, the true definition of it is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person. And really just imagining yourself in someone else's shoes, wanting to be heard and listened to, and to be present with them. We can go into the differences between empathy and sympathy, because that could be definitely something that could be confusing at times. So empathy, like I said, it's really putting yourself in someone else's shoes, trying to understand how they feel, and really just listening to them. Maybe just asking some questions of understanding how they are feeling in that present moment. And sympathy is more of providing comfort, consoling somebody, being compassionate with them. And but sometimes that could also be like giving some form of pity for somebody. So I feel those are where the differences are between empathy and sympathy.
Yeah, well, thank you for explaining that, because I know that a lot of people, especially me, a lot of times confuse those terms. And in your life, especially in your 20s, how has sympathy... Actually, no. My bad. See, I'm already confusing for it. Yeah. But in your life, especially during your 20s, how has empathy played out?
I'll tell you right now, in my 20s, I feel like it was non-existent. In my 20s, there was not a lot of listening to other people. It was more like I was just really listening, but then really trying to voice my opinion, or just talking to somebody just to reply, and I really didn't grow into being an empathic person until I became a husband and a father, and it really is one of my core values now, where I've learned to just kind of be still and listen and pause and just try to understand how someone else is feeling. Because when you have a wife and when you have kids, it's it's really it's really easy when you just kind of listen to what their needs are, you know, and ask them what do they need at that point, you know. Like I physically say to my kids, like, what do you need at this moment, you know? And it's sometimes it's hard for them to express that, but it's for me really to try to understand how they're feeling in that moment. So for people in their 20s or even, you know, like young adults, it's hard to be in that space, you know, just to try to really listen to somebody and be that person who is kind of like that non-judgmental person in their life. Like all you want to do is like hold up the mirror for somebody, you know, and just reflect on what they just said.
Yeah. Well, I think, especially for people in their 20s, especially for me when I was in my 20s, usually the default is thinking about oneself. And it sounds like with empathy, you really have to be a good listener. There seems to be a correlation between listening and being more empathetic. So with that, for people listening or watching, like what are practical ways that they can be a better listener? And what are practical ways that they can be more empathetic?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll give you a few. One, it may sound silly, but really one of them is really making eye contact with somebody.
I've been doing my best to do this.
Yeah. Like nonverbal cues is a form of communication, you know? So it's like making eye contact with someone is really, they let the other person know that you're listening to them, you know, being present with them in that moment. So it may sound silly, but, you know, and it's hard to do sometimes when you're looking at someone in the eye, especially these days when people are so glued to their phones. And, you know, they'd rather look at their phone than the person like talking right in front of them. So that's one way. Another way is what I've kind of just learned too in the past few years is don't give advice, especially unsolicited advice. One of my friends, he's also a life coach. He's told me once, and it really stuck, where it said, advice is something that we tell people, but it's for us, you know. It's something that that we kind of need to hear, you know, instead of what they need to hear.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so with that then, like, are there other practical ways then on how we can be more present and be more there, be more empathetic to people, especially when they come to us with problems or something that they're going through?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways. I'll let you know. I'll give you a link to this. There's a TED Talk, I think, by Celeste Headley, and it is 10 ways to have a better conversation. And I won't go through all of them, but I'll talk about the ones relative to this topic. And one of them is don't pontificate. And by what I mean by that is really trying to express your opinion to somebody and trying to interject and think that you know what they're going through, you know? Like you think you relate to them, but you really don't, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, and you're expressing your opinion about their life. You know, it's not your life, it's like their life, and you don't know what someone's going through. So another way is don't equate, you know, your situation with their situation. You know, like I said, you don't know what someone's going through. So don't try to like be on the same level, like you understand everything, you know. That's where you're trying to seek to understand and be genuinely curious. And that's a tip right there, genuinely being curious about how that person is feeling.
Yeah.
You know, asking questions.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
You're fine. It
So-
was a alarm.
Alarm, and it says, "What are you grateful for?"
Oh, wow.
So at 8 p.m. I usually set an alarm for what you're grateful for. So I'll say right now that I'm grateful for my time here with you. So thank you.
That is awesome. Then.
Sorry about that. Sorry for the viewers.
No problem. No, but like, I am grateful that you are here. And going back, I think going back to that conversation, I think that for me, what did you mention, I think is really good. I think this concept of it's okay to not understand from the get-go of like what you're talking to someone. I feel like there's just sometimes, especially for me, like I want to come to the conversation with the awareness that I know everything that this person is going through or that they have gone through.
Yeah.
And so that's a really good, those are really good tips.
Yeah.
And for that link that you've mentioned, oh, sorry, you were going to say.
Yeah, I was going to say, because there's another one in that TED Talk as well, where it's the last one too, where it's really just shut up and listen. You know, it's like, just listen to the person and listen to understand, not to reply. You know, a lot of the times we're trying to, when we're having a conversation, you know, there's that moment, there's that itch where you just like, you want to say something already, you know, but it's like, you should listen to understand, not to reply. And I'll give you one last practical tip, and I think it's a very important one. I think it's something where we can probably expand on this on another episode, but it's do not let your empathy for others drain you drain your energy for the capacity to love yourself. You know, it's like don't let all this trying to understand someone's feelings. Don't get so caught up into it where you neglect your own feelings. You know, there needs to be some boundaries. You know, you need to protect your energy. You need to protect yourself. And it really is just, don't neglect your own needs when you're listening to someone else's story. You know, that's their story. You know, like they have to own it. You don't have to own their story. You just have to be there for them at that moment.
Yeah. Well, no, that's amazing. Especially going back to what the first point of what you said of listening to understand. Yeah. I think that, well, as I talk to a lot of people, whether it's through 20-Allthings or not, I have this default mode of, okay, what should I say next? But I like that the mindset should be, what are they trying to say and how can I be present in there as they explain things? So that's really helpful. And then with the second part of that, like, yes, I totally like love the story that you share, and I'm totally fascinated by your story. So with that, as like the one final question, like if you were going to talk to yourself in your 20s and give him advice about empathy, what would you tell yourself?
About empathy, what would I tell myself in my 20s? I mean, what I would tell myself in my 20s is, you know, that you're running your own race. You know, I would say don't compare yourself to others. But in relative to empathy, it's really just that. It's that when you're listening to someone, it's their story. Like I said, you know, you don't get caught up in their story, but sometimes we do. You know, and then we compare ourselves, you know, and that's where, you know, your self comes in and your ego comes in, and you just talk about, you know, you want to talk about yourself, you know, when you try to relate to everything. So I would tell myself to not compare myself to others.
That's a good reminder for everyone, especially for people in their 20s. So on that note, thank you very much, Jason. Those are really practical steps. And, you know, it was really helpful to listen from a perspective of a life coach on how to be more empathetic.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, for those of you who are watching, we thank you for tuning in. We are on YouTube. And for those of you listening, we are on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We hope that you enjoyed this episode, and we hope to see you next time for 20-Allthings.
Yeah, I'm young, but I'm hungry. Here to learn, I won't let you take it from me. Grown talk, yeah, I'm talking 20-something. I don't know about much, but know one thing. I'm only good at being young. I'm only good at being young.